Well, in this scenario, I have cut less. I will plant less. I should yield more. Less is more. I think oftentimes people will pick up a piece of property, they look at the property and they go, okay, well here's a field, and if I can plant this field, or if I can, I can throw a stand up on the side of the field and it'll be sufficient. And maybe it will. It depends on where you are and how much pressure that property has, but sometimes a very, very simple change in how you approach that field, or how you feed. There's a whole bunch of different factors there, but I want to kind of go through one of those with one field on this property I picked up last year. So one thing you'll see when I've got a really big grown-up field, it's right about 5 acres, just shy of 5 acres. You got drains on both sides, one big drain on the western edge, and I think that's where the majority of the deer are going to come from. That's kind of the core area. The neighbor can't really hunt it either. So we moved the box, got the box set up on this field edge, and instead of getting wild with the bush hog and destroying, I shouldn't say destroying, but getting aggressive with the bush hog and just cutting everything down, I was very strategic in how I cut this field. So what ends up happening, if you're careful, oftentimes deer, if you've got food plots that have some type of separation between the actual food sources, so you'll see this property is like it's like a turkey foot. You got 3 primary shooting lanes, food plots, whatever you want to call them, about 4 or 5 bush hogs wide each, but I left a buffer between each of them. And so even on the tractor, so I'm elevated, even on the tractor I can't see from one food plot to the next, to the next, to the next. Well, the reason that's important is there's several reasons. One is deer like to feel safe and secure, and so if you can provide them an area where they can feed and they don't feel extremely exposed, oftentimes they will be more comfortable. So that's one reason. Second reason, from a hunting perspective, more so than just deer comfort, is a mature buck, or even just bucks in general, I guess I should say, if you've got food sources where they can, like if you've got a big field, if I cut this whole field and I planted it, a buck could walk up to the edge of that food source, look across that 5 acre field, not see any does that they're interested in, or there may not be any, if there's no does at all especially, they're going to turn around and walk off, or they're going to skirt that field. Well, if I've got 2 or 3 or 4 places for these deer to feed that are effectively independent of one another, those bucks are going to have to check all of them. And the more areas that I have for him to check, the longer he's going to be there, and the more likely the more likely it is that I will have an opportunity to shoot him. Something else to consider just the social pressure aspect of it. If you've ever had a feeder or a food plot, sometimes you'll see big mature does can be bully deer, or bucks will be bully deer, and they'll push other deer around. Well, if you've got multiple places on the same property for them to each have their own little area, it's going to open up the social aspect of having more deer in front of you at the same time. And the longer you can keep those deer in the field, in visibility, in sight, the better off you're going to be. So, you know, there's a lot of pieces to it. I'd have to go back and look. The QDMA put out they've done a ton of research. QDMA has, but I remember reading or hearing one of the podcasts of theirs a few years ago talking about property improvements, and don't quote me on this, but the rough idea was the benefit to a property of planting the first 2 acres, whatever it is, 2 or 3% of the property that you plant. The benefits from that are extreme, like they are extremely high benefit. You get beyond that threshold, so let's say the threshold's 3%, and you get a considerable measured yield. You get to 5, 6, 10%, the yield from that investment really is greatly diminished. I mean, from an economic standpoint, it's the concept of what do they call it? Diminishing marginal utility, I think is the term. So your benefit is decreased the more that you do. So my point with that is simply, in this scenario, I've got 3 smaller planted areas, so I'm not overplanting, right? I'm not spending money on a food plot that's not going to be eaten, while at the same time maximizing my visibility, maximizing the ability for them socially to be able to feed and accommodate. And I'm also, in a sense, maximizing what these bucks will have to do to see these does by doing less, right? Like we hear in life a lot of times, less is more. Well, in this scenario, I have cut less, I will plant less, I should yield more. Less is more. Trying to make an effective hunting scenario that's easily accessible is important. In my world, I assume it's the same in yours.